Also, a day of action.
I have cried and thought I just had to do something.
The message these Vancouver protesters want to send Donald Trump.
This is CTV News with Michelle Bernoro and Scott Roberts.
Protesters in Vancouver joined hundreds of thousands across North America today calling for an end to the U.S. government's zero-tolerance policy on illegal immigration. It comes after 2,000 children were separated from their parents at the American border.
Families divided need to be united.
The backdrops were fitting for a protest against U.S. immigration policy. Demonstrators marching from the American consulate to the Trump Tower in downtown Vancouver, decrying the recent separation of more than 2,000 children from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border.
I think it's absolutely inhumane and immoral, and it needs to be stopped immediately. We need to do everything we can.
Children played a role in the demonstration, many parents bringing them as a reminder to lawmakers who really stands to lose. Those here calling on the Canadian government to pressure the U.S. to stop the child detentions and end the Safe Third Country Agreement, requiring Ottawa to turn away migrants at official border crossings who've already made refugee claims in the U.S.
I can't even imagine having my little guy taken away from me.
The crowd in Vancouver joining thousands across North America taking part in similar events today.
Not in cages.
In Washington, many dressing in white demonstrating across from the White House. In Toronto, a sea of stuffed animals lining a boulevard outside the U.S. consulate.
It's a representation of each of the separated children.
U.S. President Donald Trump has issued an executive order to end family separation and reunite them. But his administration continues to argue it has the right to detain parents and children crossing the border illegally for as long as their immigration proceedings last, in many cases, several months. Protesters hope that won't be the case.
I have cried and thought I just had to do something, and part of that something is being here today.
Doing what little they can to call for an end to scenes like this.
People across North America gathered today to protest a controversial American immigration policy that separated children from their families.
One of the protests was right here in Calgary, where demonstrators are pushing to reunite those divided families. Ina Sidhu reports.
They felt moved by images of children separated from their parents.
I don't approve of what's going on in the States right now with immigrants.
Dozens of Calgarians gathered outside the building housing the American consulate. They're joining a growing chorus of voices demanding families torn apart be reunited.
If none of us stand up, then the evil master just keeps thinking they're in control.
More than 2,500 migrant children have been separated from their families in recent weeks. The majority are still being held by authorities despite an order from Donald Trump to stop the zero-tolerance immigration policy.
And it's just unconscionable to know that kids are being held as political pawns in camps without their parents. They don't speak English.
People came together in hundreds of U.S. cities to protest the border separation policy. The main gathering was in Washington, D.C.
Say it loud, say it clear. Immigrants are welcome here.
There were rallies in Canadian cities too, including Lethbridge. Organizers say even though the group was small, their message was strong.
We're just standing in solidarity. You know, this is something that's really not cool. What's going on in the United States is it's inhumane, and there's still a lot of children who haven't been reunited with their families. So it's a call to action here.
One family who immigrated to Canada felt compelled to stand with Americans.
I cannot imagine myself being separated out of my family just because of living in a different country. It's just heartbreaking.
Even though Donald Trump signed an executive order last week to end the family separation policy, there are delays in reuniting the families. Until they are, Calgarians thousands of kilometers away from decision makers at the White House believe their voices matter.
It's so bad that Canadians are mad. I hope we can stand together with the people in the States and let them know that we're here and we care.
Ina Sidhu, CTV
Hundreds
News,
of thousands
Calgary.
across North America are demanding the Trump administration immediately reunite families divided at the U.S.-Mexico border. Protests took place in many major cities today, including here in Edmonton. Demonstrators want Trump's controversial immigration policies to change.
We are people. We are not illegal.
At this South Edmonton park, a loud show of support for families seeking asylum, now divided.
No borders, no nations. Stop the deportations.
Protesters here and across the continent want families torn apart at the border to be reunited. Images like these of children caged in tent cities sparking global outrage.
I will not stand for somebody else turning this country further down the road of racism and disenfranchisement. Enough is enough.
More than 2,500 migrant children have been separated from their parents in recent weeks. Many still detained despite an order from Trump to stop the zero-tolerance immigration policy.
Shame.
These local demonstrators asking the Canadian government to step in.
What is happening is unacceptable. Canada has to put pressure on the United States to stop this, and Canada as a country has to stop it as well.
This organizer says refugee children have been detained in Canada too.
Since Prime Minister Trudeau has taken over, there have been at least 6 deaths of detained refugees. So we need to look at that and look at changing policies with regard to how refugees are accepted into the country.
Protests against the practice taking place in Washington and New York and Canadian cities like Calgary and Toronto.
They shouldn't be punished for seeking asylum. It's a basic human right, and it's wrong.
But no matter the city, the message the same.
The law needs to change.
Families belong together. That was the message of Winnipeggers today gathered here at the U.S. consulate to demand the United States stop separating and detaining families. But it was a message also directed at home.
No one is illegal! No one is illegal!
As bad as the things that are happening in the U.S., as bad as they are, it's important for Canadian citizens to not get complicit and complacent that there are lots of terrible things and family separations and detentions happening here.
We have seen the painful and ruthless kidnapping of Indigenous children from their parents. The psychological torture and physical torture of these children continue to show its damaging consequences within Canada's Indigenous community as we stand here today on Treaty 1 territory.
They pointed to the 60s scoop and residential schools as historical examples and apprehension through Child and Family Services as current injustice.
When I was in the system, I experienced lots of grief, loss, sexual abuse, homelessness after I left it, and it was like, what was I really protected against? My family who helped me out. It was them who I wanted to be with.
Their other focus was safety and security for immigrants and refugees. They signed petitions to scrap the Safe Third Country Agreement and asked that migrant workers be granted permanent resident status.
These workers are forced to leave their families in order to care for them. They can be separated for 5 to 7 years or longer before even seeing their children even once.
The final petition was for the United States to reunify families, saying separation traumatizes them while they're trying to escape previous trauma.
I'm a parent. These are my kids here, and that is every single parent's nightmare. And to witness parents having to go through that is just heartbreaking. And to know that it's happening so close, it's words can't even describe it.
In Winnipeg, Stephanie Lasuk, City News.
Well, CTV's Tracy Tong is live outside the U.S. consulate on University Avenue, where demonstrators gathered in solidarity here in Toronto. Tracy.
And Andrea, there were hundreds of people here earlier today. Some of them longtime activists, others were first-time protesters, but all of them saying that they will not stay silent on this issue. Some bringing teddy bears and stuffed toys to represent the children who have been separated from their families.
Keeping families together!
People spilled onto the street in front of the U.S. consulate in Toronto with messages for the American president.
And these immigration policies declaring people illegal, putting them in jails, it's inhumane.
So we want this stopped, we want everyone reunited, and we want to change the immigration policy in both Canada and the U.S.
Activists and parents are here to protest the Trump administration's zero-tolerance immigration policy that separated more than 2,000 children from their families at the U.S.-Mexico border, many bringing stuffed animals today.
So it's a representation of each of the separated children.
I'm an immigrant, and that's what I think. It could be me. You know, it could be us.
Canadians saying they will not be idle neighbors. This rally is one of 16 across the country today.
This is disgusting what's been done, and I thank every Canadian for standing with Americans.
This continent, the borders that we currently have, those are just lines in the dust to us.
Toronto's rally became a march all the way to Queen's Park. Organizers say the calls for action must come from all levels of government.
Whether it be municipal, provincial, or federal, have a role to ensure that all of our peoples can live and thrive.
And while Trump signed an executive order last week to end the family separation policy, there are delays reuniting the more than 2,000 children with their parents.
It's not enough because they're not liberated. Asylum seeking is not a crime, and it's a humanitarian right.
Some parents bringing their own children to today's rally.
Do you know why it says stop? I don't like it because they were putting kids and babies and grown-ups away from each other.
My son here is almost 10 months, and this is his third rally or his third demonstration.
Teaching the next generation to stand up for what they believe in, too.
And organizers have also made a list of demands of the U.S. government and the Canadian government. They say they want to end unjust deportation and detention and revoke the Safe Third Country Agreement. Reporting live, I'm Tracy Tong. Colin, back to you.
Thank you, Tracy. The Trump administration may have vowed to stop separation at the U.S. and Mexico border, but outrage over the policy is growing.
There are more than 2,000 children sitting alone in youth detention centers today. People in Canada and the United States took their anger to the streets.
CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver has more.
We have a message for Washington, D.C. today, don't we, New York City?
Their message is simple. Pulling kids from their parents at the U.S.-Mexico border is wrong.
Having my kids around, I know how difficult it is to even be away from them for a day. It is unconscionable to take kids away from their parents for any length of time.
Tired of being upset, Gwen Murray decided to act. Joining Ottawa's protest against Donald Trump's so-called zero-tolerance policy that in 2 months has seen more than 2,000 migrants forced into youth detention centers.
I just thought it was important to also bring my kids to start them understanding how to be global citizens, how some people aren't as fortunate, and you have to stand up for what you believe in, and people who don't get what you get.
Revolt, revolt, revolt! Resistance is not enough!
At similar rallies across the United States,
I wish I could give you a big hug. I know that kids should be with families.
It was the kids who provided the most poignant messages.
I wish the president would think about everyone else who is suffering and sad and try to help.
No hate! No fear!
With more than 600 rallies across Canada and the United States, local organizers hope change is imminent.
The more the other side is doing things we don't like, the more we need to fight back.
It's not about a political party being this or another political party being that. It's just about these people should not be treated this way, right? It comes down to human rights.
Annie Bergeron-Oliver, CTV News.
Families Belong Together rallies and marches were held across North America today, including here in the Maritimes. Protesters calling for the reunification of families separated as a result of Donald Trump's immigration policies. And today in Halifax, CTV's Ron Shaw has more on an American military band that was met with loud protest.
They arrived for a group photo, but were quickly shouted away.
No justice on stolen land! No justice on stolen land! Mi'kmaq! On surrender! Mi'kmaq!
The band last seen heading up the hill for pre-show rehearsal for tonight's Nova Scotia tattoo. Then, cheers of victory. More than 2,500 migrant children have been separated from their families in recent weeks as they attempted to cross into the U.S.
No one is illegal on stolen land, and we wanted to make a point to these folks who are here protecting people that they need to start focusing on protecting these children.
One protester, the child of parents from Central America, can empathize with the struggle people endure to find a better life.
It's very heartbreaking. It's very emotionally draining, and I'm definitely feeling the repercussions up here in Canada.
Despite the obviously very warm weather today, dozens came here with their messages, and it wasn't all about Donald Trump in the U.S.
Horrified that our neighbors, who I've always felt have the same or similar humanitarian values as Canadians, are allowing things to happen as they are.
Indigenous elder Billy Lewis wants to remind people that government action to break up families may be in the news, but it's not new.
There are more kids, quote, in care than there was at the height of the residential schools struggle.
They say the plight of refugee children separated from the parents is entangled in broader, even global issues of social justice. They hope, with similar protests going on around the world, that their voices will be heard and families will be reunited. Ron Shaw, CTV News, Halifax.